Before I tell you how my Thanksgiving turned into the day I stopped being silent, let me ask you something. Have you ever been humiliated so deeply by family that the room spun, yet they expected you to smile through it? Have you ever felt your husband's hand on your arm, not in comfort, but in warning to stay quiet while his father shoved you down in front of everyone? Stay with me, because this story isn't about turkey or family dinners. It's about betrayal, power, and the moment when silence became my weapon. My name is Rachel Whitmore, and I'm 36 years old. As I pulled into the circular driveway of my in-laws' estate in Raleigh that Thanksgiving morning, I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, steadying myself for what lay ahead. The November air bit through my coat as I stepped out, carrying the bottle of Chateau Margaux I'd carefully selected, not because they'd appreciate it, but because appearing empty-handed would give them ammunition. The Whitmore estate sprawled across 3 acres of manicured perfection, all white columns and grand windows that caught the weak autumn sun. From inside, I could already hear the familiar sounds the NFL pregame show blaring from Edgar's 70-inch TV, bursts of laughter that seemed to pause whenever I appeared, and the clatter of expensive china being arranged just so by Clara's meticulous hands. I smoothed my simple black dress, Nordstrom, not Neiman Marcus, another detail Clara would catalog, and walked up the stone steps. Through the etched glass doors, I could see the family already gathered. My husband Mark stood by the bar, bourbon in hand at 11:30 in the morning, nodding along to whatever his brother James was saying. James's wife Victoria perched on the cream leather sofa, her Hermes bag positioned just so, ensuring everyone could see the logo. The door opened before I could knock. Clara stood there, her smile as perfectly arranged as her pearls. "Rachel, dear, you're late." I was exactly on time, but defending myself would only make things worse. "Happy Thanksgiving, Clara." She air-kissed my cheeks, her fingers barely grazing my shoulders as if poverty might be contagious. "Is that what you're wearing?" The house smelled of roasting turkey and rosemary, of wealth and judgment. Every surface gleamed, from the marble floors to the crystal chandelier that had supposedly been in Edgar's family for generations. I'd researched it once ordered from Restoration Hardware 5 years ago. Mark glanced up as I entered the living room, giving me that tight smile that meant, behave. He didn't come to greet me, didn't offer to take my coat. After 8 years of marriage, he'd perfected the art of strategic distance whenever his family gathered. "Rachel brought wine," Clara announced to the room, holding the bottle like it might be a gas station purchase. "How thoughtful." Edgar didn't look up from his recliner, his attention fixed on the screen where men in padded armor crashed into each other. "Put it in the kitchen. We're serving the Camus today." The dismissal was practiced, casual. I was the hired help who'd somehow wandered into the family photo. Victoria smirked, adjusting her tennis bracelet at anniversary gift from James. She'd mentioned 4 times already. I made my way to the kitchen, where the caterers Clara had hired moved with choreographed precision. Yes, caterers. Clara would never actually cook the Thanksgiving meal, though she'd take credit for every bite. I set the wine on the counter, knowing it would never be opened. Through the kitchen window, I could see the pool house where Mark had proposed 4 years ago. He'd been different then, or maybe I'd been blinder. Love has a way of muting red flags, turning them into quirky family dynamics you tell yourself you'll navigate with grace. "Rachel, sweetie, could you help set the table?" Clara's voice carried that false sweetness that meant an order, not a request. "The good china, of course. You do know the difference, don't you?" The caterer nearest to me, a young woman with kind eyes, gave me a sympathetic look. I wondered what she saw the outsider trying too hard. The wife who'd never quite fit the mold, the woman who drove a Honda in a family of Mercedes. If only they knew, if only they had the slightest idea that Robert Gray, my father, had built Whitmore and Gray Capital from nothing, that when he died 3 years ago, everything had passed to me. $53 million in assets, Carefully managed, deliberately hidden. I'd kept my job as a financial analyst at a small firm downtown, kept my 2-bedroom apartment, kept my secret. Because I wanted to see who they really were when they thought I had nothing to offer but myself. As I arranged the Waterford crystal glasses, yes, Clara. I knew the difference. I heard Edgar's booming voice from the living room. At least James married up. Some people understand the importance of maintaining standards. Mark's silence was deafening. I placed the last glass, its crystal singing softly as it touched the table, and thought about the manila folder in my car, the one with all the contracts, all the debts, all the carefully documented proof of how the great Whitmore fortune was nothing but smoke and mirrors propped up by loans from the very company they didn't know I owned. The turkey would be served at 4 o'clock. By 4:30, everything would change. The contempt had been building for years, like sediment settling at the bottom of a glass, invisible until you stirred it up. As more family arrived for dinner, each interaction added another layer. "Rachel, you're still working at that little firm downtown." Edgar's voice boomed across the room as he finally emerged from his recliner throne. At 62, he carried himself like a man who'd built an empire, though I knew his construction business had been hemorrhaging money for the past 18 months. "Mark tells me you're still pushing papers for what's his name, Davidson." "Henderson," I corrected quietly. "And yes, I'm still there." "Such a shame," Clara interjected, gliding over with her 3rd glass of Chablis. "Victoria just made partner at Pemberton and Associates, youngest female partner in the firm's history." She touched Victoria's arm proudly, as if she'd personally argued the cases that earned the promotion. Victoria preened, her diamond studs catching the light. "It's really about knowing the right people. Networking is everything in law." She paused, eyes sliding to me. "Though I suppose in financial analysis, at smaller firms, it's different." The way she said smaller firms made it sound like I worked in a strip mall between a payday lender and a bail bondsman. James laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "At least Rachel's consistent. Same job, same apartment, same car for 3 years now?" 4, Mark corrected, finally speaking up. But instead of defending me, he added, "I've told her we could upgrade the Honda, but she's attached to it." Attached to it, like I was a child clinging to a teddy bear instead of a woman making deliberate choices about what to reveal and when. Edgar's sister Margaret arrived at 2 o'clock, sweeping in with her latest husband, number 4, a man half her age with veneered teeth and wandering eyes. "The help seems lovely this year. Clara," she said, nodding toward the kitchen. Then her gaze landed on me. "Oh, Rachel, I didn't see you there. You blend in so well." The cousins came next, each one a variation on the Whitmore theme entitled Oblivious, and convinced their last name meant something beyond debt and delusion. They talked about their European vacations, their children's private schools, their country club memberships, all of it financed by credit lines I could see in my mind's eye, red numbers bleeding across spreadsheets. "Dude, did you see the new Tesla in the driveway?" Cousin Bradley asked, jingling his keys. The Model S Plaid, 0 to 60 in under 2 seconds. "Leased or purchased?" I asked innocently. His face reddened. "Purchased, of course." A lie. I'd processed the lease agreement myself through a subsidiary company 2 weeks ago. 84-month terms at 11% interest. Highway robbery. But Bradley never read the fine print. Clara orchestrated the pre-dinner symphony of subtle insults with a conductor's precision. "Rachel, dear, you must share your secret for staying so consistent with your appearance. The same hairstyle for years. How refreshing in this age of constant change. And those sensible shoes," Margaret added. "So practical. Victoria, show everyone your new Louboutins." Victoria stood, modeling her $1,000 heels while I sat in my sensible flats, thinking about the investment account I'd opened in her husband's name 6 months ago, shorting his own company's stock based on insider information he'd drunkenly shared at last year's Christmas party. The SEC would be very interested in those trades when the time came. "Rachel's from where again?" Edgar's college roommate Thomas asked, arriving late with his much younger third wife. "Somewhere outside Charlotte." "Greensboro," I said. "Ah, yes, the furniture capital," he said, making it sound like I'd grown up in a factory warehouse. "Salt of the earth people there." "Salt of the earth, code for poor, unrefined, not our kind." Mark stood by the bar, now on his fourth bourbon, letting each barb land without interference. When we'd first married, he'd occasionally speak up, offer weak protests, but somewhere along the way, he'd decided it was easier to let his family say what he was thinking anyway. "Remember when Rachel brought that green bean casserole to Easter?" Clara laughed, the sound tinkling like shattering champagne flutes, with the canned onions on top so wonderfully retro, like something from a 1950s cookbook. Everyone laughed. Even Mark cracked a smile. I excused myself to use the bathroom, but instead stood in Edgar's study, looking at his wall of awards and accolades. North Carolina Business Leader of the Year, 2018. By 2019, he'd been taking private loans from my company to keep the lights on. The trophy gleamed, polished weekly by the housekeeper, a monument to smoke and mirrors. My phone buzzed. A text from Jordan, my lawyer. "Everything's ready. Just say when." I tucked the phone away and returned to the gathering storm of Whitmore family pride, where Edgar was regaling everyone with the story of his latest development deal, a project I knew had fallen through 3 weeks ago, leaving him with a 7-figure loss he hadn't told Clara about yet. "Some people build legacies," he said, eyes finding me across the room. "Others just exist." 3:15, 45 minutes until dinner. 45 minutes until existing would become something else entirely. The dining room at 4 o'clock looked like something from a magazine spread crystal catching the light, silver gleaming, the enormous turkey golden and glistening on its platter. Clara had arranged us with the precision of a chess master, Edgar at the head, herself at the foot, the important family members closest to power, and me, of course, squeezed between Cousin Bradley's teenage son and Margaret's new husband's empty chair. He'd already wandered off to take a business call. "Let us give thanks," Edgar began, his voice filling the room with practiced authority. "For family, for prosperity, for maintaining the standards that separate us from, well, from those less fortunate." Everyone bowed their heads except me. I watched them all. These people who thought misfortune was something that happened to other people, lesser people, people like they assumed I was. The meal began with its usual choreography, Clara directing the caterers with subtle hand gestures, Victoria holding court about her latest case, James pontificating about market trends he didn't understand. I ate in silence, cutting my turkey into precise, small pieces, aware of every clink of silver against china. Then it happened. I reached for the gravy boat at the same moment Margaret's husband returned, jostling the table as he squeezed past. The boat tipped, sending a ribbon of gravy across Clara's pristine Irish linen tablecloth, a wedding gift from her grandmother. She'd mentioned only a dozen times. The room froze. "Jesus Christ!" Edgar's fist slammed the table, rattling every piece of crystal. He shot up from his chair so fast it scraped against the hardwood floor. "Can you do nothing right?" "Edgar, it was an accident," I began. An accident." He moved toward me, his face purple with rage. "You've been nothing but an accident since Mark dragged you into this family. Look at this." He gestured at the spreading stain. "This tablecloth is worth more than your entire wardrobe." "Edgar," Mark said weakly. "Come on." "Shut up. Mark." Edgar's eyes never left mine. "Your wife is an embarrassment. She's always been an embarrassment. Sitting here pretending she belongs when everyone knows she's trash from—" I stood up. I said it was an accident. "You don't get to speak in my house." His hand shot out, shoving my shoulder hard. I stumbled backward, catching myself on the chair, but the force knocked me down into the seat. The teenage boy next to me gasped. Someone Victoria, I think, let out a nervous laugh. The room spun, but not from the impact, from the absolute clarity of the moment. Edgar towered over me, his bulk blocking the chandelier light, his hands still clenched as if he might do it again. "You sit there and keep your mouth shut," he snarled. "Or better yet, get out. Go back to whatever gutter you crawled out of." I looked at Mark. My husband, the man who'd promised to love and protect me, sat frozen, his bourbon glass halfway to his lips. Our eyes met across the table. "Mark!" My voice came out steady, though my hands shook. He set down his glass slowly, deliberately. Then he leaned toward me and said the words that severed whatever remained between us. "Just stay quiet, Rachel. Don't make this worse. Don't make this worse." As if I was the problem, as if his father putting his hands on me was something I'd caused by existing in the wrong tax bracket. Clara's voice cut through the silence, artificially bright. "Well, these things happen. Maria," she signaled to the head caterer, "could you bring some club soda for the stain?" "These things happen," Victoria echoed, reaching for her wine. "Remember last year when the dog knocked over the candlesticks?" They were already moving on, already erasing it, turning domestic violence into a funny story they'd tell next year. "Remember when Edgar pushed Rachel past the cranberry sauce?" I stood up slowly, my legs steady now. The shake in my hands had transformed into something else, something cold and decisive. "Where are you going?" Mark asked, finally finding his voice when it no longer mattered. I didn't answer. I walked to my coat, hanging in the foyer, and pulled it on with deliberate calm. Behind me, I heard Edgar laugh. "Let her go. Maybe she'll finally get the message that she doesn't belong here." "Rachel!" Mark called out. But he didn't get up. He didn't follow. He sat there with his bourbon and his cowardice while his family returned to their meal. Margaret's voice drifted after me. "Honestly, Edgar, you showed remarkable restraint. I would have done worse." "The gravy boat was Waterford," Clara added, as if that justified everything. I pulled out my phone as I reached the door. My hands were perfectly steady now as I typed a single message to Jordan. "Now." The last thing I heard before the door closed behind me was Edgar's booming voice. "Good riddance. Mark, next time find someone who knows her place." I stood on their perfect porch, looking out at their perfect lawn, the November air sharp against my face. They thought I was running away. They thought they'd won. Inside, they were laughing again, the sounds of silverware and conversation resuming as if nothing had happened, as if a man hadn't just assaulted his daughter-in-law while his son watched in silence. They had no idea what was coming. The funny thing about keeping someone's secrets is that you learn exactly where to apply pressure, and I'd been keeping the Whitmores' secrets for years. My phone buzzed. "Jordan, confirmed. Everything initiates at 4:30 p.m. I looked at my watch. 4:23 p.m. 7 minutes. I didn't run. I walked down their curved driveway with measured steps, my heels clicking against the imported stone with a rhythm that felt like counting down. Each step took me further from that dining room, from the sound of their laughter already bubbling up as if nothing had happened. The cold hit differently now. It wasn't biting or harsh, it was clarifying, like diving into water that shocks every nerve into awareness. My breath came out in white clouds that dissolved into the November afternoon, and I found myself thinking about dissolution, about things that appear solid until they simply aren't anymore. My Honda sat among the luxury cars like a confession of poverty, but I'd never been more grateful for it. It was mine, purchased with cash, no liens or loans or financial strings that could be pulled. I slipped inside and sat for a moment in the familiar quiet, my hands on the wheel. Through the dining room windows, I could see them all, illuminated like actors on a stage. Edgar had returned to his throne at the head of the table, gesturing with his fork as he told some story. Mark was pouring another bourbon. Clara was directing the caterers to clean the gravy stain. Life had already returned to normal, because this was their normal casual cruelty followed by willful amnesia. My phone showed 4:28 p.m. I pulled out the folder from beneath my seat, the one I'd been carrying for 6 months like a loaded weapon with the safety on. Inside were copies of every document that mattered: loan agreements, financial statements, property deeds, investment portfolios. The real ones, not the fictional versions Edgar showed Clara or the inflated narratives he sold to his country club friends. 4:29 p.m. I thought about Mark, about the man I'd fallen in love with before I understood that he was just a softer version of his father, his cruelty more passive but no less real. He'd stood by and watched me be diminished, piece by piece, until I'd almost believed I was as small as they said I was. Almost. 4:30 p.m. My phone erupted with notifications. I didn't need to read them to know what they said. The automated transfers had begun. The margin calls would trigger within minutes. The credit lines were being frozen. Every financial instrument the Whitmores depended on was being systematically dismantled. I started the car and drove slowly past the dining room windows one last time. Edgar was laughing at something, his head thrown back, completely unaware that his world had already ended. It just hadn't reached him yet. The security guard at the gate waved me through with the same dismissive half gesture he always used, like I was barely worth the effort of acknowledgement. I wondered if he'd still have a job tomorrow when the estate went into foreclosure. I drove through the streets of Raleigh, past the country club where Edgar held court, past the shopping centers where Clara spent money they didn't have, past the office buildings where James and Victoria pretended to be more successful than they were, all of it built on borrowed time and borrowed money. And I held the notes. My phone rang. Mark. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. Edgar this time. Then Clara. Then James. Then numbers. I didn't recognize probably their banker, their lawyer, their accountant, all trying to understand why their financial world had suddenly gone dark. I pulled into a small park overlooking the city and got out, leaving my phone in the car. The air was colder now as evening approached, but I didn't hurry. I walked to a bench and sat down, looking out at the lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. This was where my father used to take me when I was young, after my mother died. He'd built his company from nothing, turned a small investment firm into an empire, but he never forgot what it felt like to be dismissed, to be looked down on, to be told you didn't belong. Never let them make you small, Rachel, he'd said, and never show your hand until you're ready to play it. I'd shown my hand now. By morning, the news would be everywhere. The great Edgar Whitmore, exposed as a fraud propped up by loans from the very company his daughter-in-law had inherited. The estate would be seized, the cars repossessed, the country club membership revoked. Everything they'd used to make themselves feel superior would be stripped away. But that wasn't the cruelest part. The cruelest part was that I'd left them enough, just enough to survive. They'd have to downsize to a small apartment, maybe in one of those complexes Edgar liked to call welfare housing. Mark would have to find an actual job, not the pretend position at his father's company. Clara would have to shop at regular stores, cook her own meals, clean her own house. They'd have to live like they'd always assumed I lived. My phone, even from inside the car, was lighting up like a slot machine. The panic would be setting in now. Edgar would be screaming at bankers who wouldn't take his calls. Clara would be crying, her perfect makeup running. Mark would be drinking, trying to understand how his wife, his quiet, submissive, working-class wife, had orchestrated their complete destruction. I walked back to my car and picked up my phone. 47 missed calls. I scrolled through them all, then blocked every Whitmore number. The last text was from Jordan. All transactions complete. The Whitmore assets are now under your full control. What would you like to do with them? I typed back, liquidate everything, donate the proceeds to the women's shelter. Then I drove home to my modest apartment, made myself a cup of tea, and sat by my window watching the city lights. Somewhere across town, The Whitmores were learning what it felt like when the world shifted beneath you, when the people you trusted stayed silent, when power was used against you without mercy. They were learning what it felt like to be me at their table. Except I'd walked away with my dignity intact. They wouldn't have even that. The truth about my father's death was something I'd never shared with anyone, not even Mark in our better days. Robert Gray had been more than a successful businessman. He'd been a student of human nature, teaching me to read people like balance sheets, to spot liabilities disguised as assets. He'd built Whitmore and Gray Capital from a $1,000 loan and an office above a dry cleaner's shop. By the time cancer took him 3 years ago, the firm managed nearly $80 million in assets. The other partners bought out the Whitmore name decades ago. Edgar's grandfather had been a founding investor who'd sold his shares during a rough patch, a detail Edgar conveniently forgot when boasting about his family's business legacy. "Never flaunt wealth, Rachel," my father had said during his last week, when the morphine couldn't quite dull the pain, but his mind remained sharp. "Money is like a knife. It's most effective when they don't see you pull it." The lawyers had been discreet about the inheritance. At my request, everything was transferred through shell companies and trusts. To the outside world, Robert Gray's fortune had been donated to various charities, his company absorbed by a mysterious overseas investor. In reality, I controlled every penny, every decision, every contract. I'd kept my analyst job at Henderson Financial not because I needed the $47,000 annual salary, but because I needed to be invisible. The woman who drove a Honda and brought store-bought cookies to office parties couldn't possibly be worth $53 million. The daughter-in-law who endured Clara's condescension about her Nordstrom dresses couldn't possibly own the very buildings where Edgar conducted his failing business deals. The first time I'd seen the Whitmore family's real financial situation was 6 months after marrying Mark. Edgar had been bragging about a new development project, and curiosity had gotten the better of me. A few discreet inquiries through my network revealed the truth. Whitmore Construction was hemorrhaging money, propped up by a web of loans that would make a hedge fund manager dizzy. But it wasn't until I dug deeper that I found the truly damaging information. Edgar had been taking personal loans against properties he didn't fully own, using forged documents. Clara had been hiding shopping debts through credit cards in her children's names. James had been insider trading. Badly. Victoria's law firm was one investigation away from discovering she'd been padding billable hours for years. They were all criminals, white-collar country club criminals who looked down on everyone else while building their castle on quicksand. I'd started buying their debts quietly, penny by penny, using different subsidiary companies. When Edgar needed a bridge loan for his latest project, it came from me. When Clara maxed out another credit card, the debt was sold to my collections firm. When James needed capital for his trades, my investment fund was there with terms he didn't bother to read. Like spiders thinking they were catching flies, never noticing they were already wrapped in someone else's web. Mark never knew. He'd never asked about my father beyond the surface details. Never wondered why a financial analyst understood complex derivatives better than his brother with the MBA from Wharton. He saw what he wanted to see: a wife from a middle-class background who should be grateful for the privilege of joining the Whitmore dynasty. The night he proposed, slightly drunk on champagne and his own magnanimity, he'd actually said, "I know my family can be difficult, but marrying me will give you opportunities you'd never have otherwise." I'd said yes, already knowing his family was 6 months from bankruptcy without my intervention. I'd said yes, wanting to believe that love could overcome the casual classism, that Mark would grow beyond his upbringing. Instead, he'd grown into it. The transformation had been gradual. First, he'd stopped defending me when his mother made cutting remarks. Then he'd started making them himself. Little jokes about my quaint background, my cute attempts to understand their world. By our 3rd anniversary, he was openly embarrassed by me, introducing me at events as Rachel. She works in finance with an apologetic tone, as if he needed to explain why his wife wasn't a partner at a law firm or a patron of the arts. I'd watched him become his father, one bourbon at a time, one dismissive comment at a time, one moment of cowardice at a time. My phone buzzed with an email from Jordan. The subject line read, "Complete financial summary, Whitmore Family Holdings." I opened it, scanning the numbers I already knew by heart. Every asset they thought they owned, I actually controlled. The house mine through a shell company that held the real mortgage. The cars leased through my firms. The country club membership paid by my subsidiary with a cancellation clause Edgar hadn't noticed. Even Mark's salary from his father's company had been subsidized by me for the past 2 years. He'd been literally living on my charity while letting his family treat me like a beggar at their table. The irony was almost beautiful in its completeness. Another email arrived, this one from my accountant. The Whitmore margin calls have triggered. Total exposure $12.3 million. Shall we proceed with foreclosure? I thought about my father's funeral, how I'd stood alone at his grave while Mark attended a golf tournament he couldn't miss. I thought about every Christmas where Clara gave me obviously re-gifted items while lavishing her other daughter-in-law with designer goods. I thought about Edgar's hand on my shoulder, shoving me down, and Mark's voice telling me to stay quiet. I typed back, "Proceed immediately. No extensions, no negotiations." Then I poured myself a glass of wine, not the Chateau Margaux I'd brought to dinner, but a simple Pinot Noir I actually enjoyed, and stood by my apartment window. The city sparkled below, indifferent to the small tragedies and triumphs playing out behind its lit windows. Tomorrow, the Whitmores would wake up to find their entire world changed, bank accounts frozen, credit cards declined, properties seized, the careful facade of wealth and superiority crumbling like the empty shell it had always been. But tonight, they were probably still at that dining room table, toasting their superiority over the woman who'd walked out, never imagining that she hadn't run away. She'd simply stepped back to watch the collapse from a better view. The November cold bit sharper now as I stood in the parking lot of my apartment complex. Phone pressed to my ear. The sky had turned the color of old pewter, threatening snow that would never come, not in Raleigh. Not this early. But the air felt pregnant with change, with endings. Jordan Myers answered on the first ring. He'd been waiting. "Rachel, are you certain about this? Once I make these calls, there's no going back. The Whitmores will be financially destroyed by morning." I could hear the concern in his voice. Jordan had been my father's lawyer first, had watched me grow up in conference rooms and strategy meetings. He knew what this meant, what I was choosing. "They put their hands on me. Jordan." My breath came out in white clouds that disappeared into the darkening sky. In front of everyone. And my husband told me to stay quiet. Silence on the other end. Then, "I understand. I'll need you to verbally confirm the instructions for the recording." Always thorough, always protecting me even from myself. I appreciated that about him. "Initiate complete liquidation of all Whitmore-related assets. Call in all loans immediately. Freeze all credit lines associated with Edgar Whitmore, Clara Whitmore, James Whitmore, Victoria Pemberton Whitmore, and..." I paused, tasting the finality of it. "Mark Whitmore. Execute the foreclosure on the Whitmore estate. Notify the SEC about the insider trading evidence on James. Alert the North Carolina State Bar about Victoria's billing fraud. And the construction company. Bankruptcy filing at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Make sure Edgar's personal guarantees are enforced. I want him to feel every penny of debt he tried to hide from Clara." A couple walked past me in the parking lot, laughing about something, carrying leftover containers probably from their own Thanksgiving dinner. A normal couple, having a normal holiday. I wondered if that could have been Mark and me in another life. One where he'd had a spine and I'd had less money. "There's one more thing," Jordan said. "Mark has been calling the office 17 times in the last hour. He seems distressed. He should be..." He left a message saying Edgar had a mild heart episode when the first margin call came through. They're at WakeMed emergency room. I felt nothing. That probably should have disturbed me. But it didn't. Edgar had spent years giving me mild heart episodes every time I walked into their house, wondering what new humiliation awaited. "Is he stable?" "Apparently. Chest pains from stress. Not an actual heart attack." "Then proceed as planned." I heard Jordan typing, the soft click of keys that sounded like dominoes falling. Rachel, I have to ask, what about your marriage? The divorce. File the papers Monday morning. I want it clean and fast. He can have what's actually his, which is nothing. The apartment's in my name. The joint account has maybe $3,000. He can keep it. He'll contest it. Try to claim spousal support. I laughed, the sound harsh in the cold air. With what lawyer he can't afford one anymore? More typing. Then, the news about Whitmore Construction will break in tomorrow's business section. Reynolds at the Observer has been waiting for this story for months. The headline will be brutal. Good. Your name will be connected to it eventually. People will know you're the one who pulled the trigger. Let them know! I walked to my car, needing to move, to feel like I was going somewhere, even if I was just circling the parking lot. I'm done hiding. I'm done pretending to be small so they can feel big. Your father would be proud, Jordan said softly. Would he? Robert Gray had been a fighter, but he'd also been kind. He'd destroyed competitors in business but sent their kids to college anonymously. He'd been ruthless with contracts but generous with charity. I wondered what he'd think of his daughter destroying her husband's family on Thanksgiving night. Jordan, set aside $5 million from the liquidation. For what purpose? College funds. For every employee Edgar is about to screw over when the construction company goes under. Make sure they know it came from me, not from the Whitmores. That's generous. No, it's justice. Those workers did honest work. They shouldn't suffer because Edgar was a fraud. I could hear the smile in Jordan's voice. Now that sounds like Robert Gray's daughter. Make the calls, Jordan, all of them, tonight. Consider it done. Rachel. Yes. Where will you go after this all comes out? I looked up at my apartment window, the simple 2-bedroom unit I'd called home for 4 years. The Whitmores had always pitied me for it, not knowing I owned the entire building. Nowhere. This is my home. They're the ones who'll have to leave. You're not afraid of the confrontation. They taught me that confrontation is for poor people. Jordan, rich people just make phone calls and watch from a distance while other people's worlds burn. That's cold, Rachel. No, I said, ending the call as I looked at the screen showing 53 missed calls from Mark. That's exactly the right temperature. The phone immediately rang again. Mark's picture filled the screen, the photo from our wedding day, both of us smiling like we believed in forever. This time, I answered. Rachel, Jesus Christ, what have you done? His voice was raw, desperate. Dad's in the hospital. Mom's having a breakdown. Our accounts are frozen. I know. You know, Rachel. You need to stop this. Whatever you've done, undo it. This is insane. Is your father okay? Yes, he's stable, but... Then we have nothing to discuss. Rachel, please. I'm sorry about dinner. I should have stood up for you. But this is destroying my entire family. Your family destroyed themselves. I just stopped paying for the privilege of watching them do it. What are you talking about? Goodbye, Mark. Wait, Rachel. I hung up and blocked his number. Then I walked back to my apartment, made myself a cup of tea, and opened my laptop to watch the financial markets in Asia opening. The Whitmore positions would start unwinding there first. A tsunami that would reach North Carolina by dawn. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall. Not snow after all, just cold rain washing the city clean for another day. Tomorrow, Edgar Whitmore would wake up poor. Tonight, I would sleep better than I had in 8 years. I woke at 5:45 before my alarm, to the sound of sirens somewhere in the distance. For a moment, I lay still in the pre-dawn darkness, wondering if this was what the morning after revenge was supposed to feel like, calm, empty, like the silence after a storm. My phone, charging on the nightstand, showed 117 missed calls. I'd turned off the ringer but could see the screen lighting up even now with new attempts. Unknown numbers, mostly reporters probably, or lawyers, or creditors who'd gotten my number from the Whitmore's desperate scrambling. I made coffee slowly, grinding the beans by hand, heating the water to exactly 200 degrees. The ritual felt important, like I was rebuilding normalcy from small, precise actions. Outside my kitchen window, Raleigh was waking up to Black Friday, people heading out for sales, unaware that the city's supposed construction dynasty had collapsed overnight. The first news alert came at 6:15 a.m. Breaking Whitmore construction files, emergency bankruptcy, fraud investigation launched. Then another SEC raids office of James Whitmore in insider trading probe. And another, prominent Raleigh family faces financial ruin in Thanksgiving night collapse. I sipped my coffee and watched the headlines multiply like cancer cells. Jordan had been thorough, every thread pulled at once, leaving no time for damage control, no room for spin. My laptop showed the full scope of the destruction. Edgar's construction company stock, what little was publicly traded, had dropped 93% in pre-market trading. The estate that monument to Whitmore pride was already listed as pending foreclosure on 3 different sites. Someone had even started a Reddit thread, "Local rich family learns they're actually broke on Thanksgiving." The internet was having a field day. At 7, a knock at my door. Not pounding, not desperate, just 3 professional raps. Through the peephole, I saw a woman in a pressed suit holding a microphone, a cameraman behind her. The vultures had found me. I didn't answer. More knocks throughout the morning. Reporters, process servers, probably some Whitmore family friends sent to plead or threaten. I ignored them all, instead focusing on emails from Jordan confirming each fallen domino. At 11:23, my building's security called. "Ms. Gray, there's a Clara Whitmore here demanding to see you. She's agitated. Don't let her up. She says she's your mother-in-law." Not anymore. I watched from my window as Clara was escorted out 15 minutes later. Even from 3 floors up, I could see her designer coat was the same one from last year, could see her gestures growing more frantic as security remained unmoved. She looked smaller somehow, like wealth had been the scaffolding holding her upright. The phone rang my actual phone, not my cell. Only 5 people had that number. Rachel Jordan's voice. "Edgar's had another episode. He's back at WakeMed, this time in the cardiac unit." "Define episode?" "Actual heart attack this time. Mild, but real. Triggered when the sheriff served the foreclosure notice at 7A. I waited to feel something: guilt, satisfaction, anything. Still nothing. "His lawyer wants to negotiate," Jordan continued. "They're offering a settlement." "With what money?" That's the thing. Edgar apparently had a separate account Clara didn't know about. $300,000 in cash, hidden from everyone, including the IRS. Now I did feel something: a cold, clean anger. "Report it to the IRS immediately. Tax evasion on top of everything else." "That will mean prison time, Rachel." "Good." A pause. "Mark's lawyer has also been in touch. He wants to meet. Says he has information you'd want to know. Unless that information is his signature on divorce papers, I'm not interested." "I think you should hear this. It's about your father." The coffee mug slipped slightly in my hand. "What about my father?" "Mark claims Edgar was involved in some business with Robert before he died. Something about the original funding for Whitmore and Gray Capital." My father had never mentioned anything beyond the standard history: Edgar's grandfather as an early investor who sold out. But Mark wouldn't play this card unless he thought it had value. "Fine. Conference room at your office, 3 p.m. You'll be present for everything." "Of course." After Jordan hung up, I stood at my window watching the normal world go about its Black Friday shopping. Cars pulling in and out of the mall parking lot visible in the distance. Families who'd fought over turkey yesterday now fighting over flat-screen TVs. The ordinary disasters and recoveries of everyday life. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost deleted it, then saw the preview. "This is Victoria. Please." Against my better judgment, I opened it. "Rachel, I know you hate us. We deserve it. But James is being arrested right now. Our kids are watching their father in handcuffs. Whatever we did to you, please don't punish our children. Please. I thought about those kids, Brandon, 8, and Sophia, 6. They'd barely acknowledged my existence at family gatherings, already trained to see me as lesser, but they were children. I texted Jordan, set up trust funds for James and Victoria's kids, full college tuition and living expenses. The money comes from their parents' seized assets. They can't touch it, only the kids when they turn 18. His response was immediate. That's more grace than they deserve. It's not for them. At 2:30 p.m., I finally left my apartment. The reporters had mostly given up, moving on to camp outside the Whitmore estate or the hospital. I drove through a city that looked exactly the same as yesterday, reminding me that most catastrophes are personal, not universal. The radio was discussing Black Friday deals, but every half hour came an update on the Whitmore scandal. They'd already given it a name, the Thanksgiving Day Massacre. I turned it off and drove in silence toward Jordan's office, toward whatever last card Mark thought he had to play. The strange thing about destroying someone completely is that once it's done, once the building has collapsed, you're left standing in the rubble wondering what exactly you've won. I had my dignity, my freedom, my father's fortune intact. But I also had $53 million and no one to share Thanksgiving with except the ghosts of who we all used to be. I pulled into the parking garage of Jordan's building, checking my reflection in the mirror. I looked exactly the same as yesterday. Neat hair, minimal makeup, simple clothes. Nothing about my appearance suggested I'd just orchestrated the complete destruction of one of Raleigh's prominent families. That felt right somehow. The best catastrophes are the ones nobody sees coming. Mark would be upstairs, probably still in yesterday's clothes, trying to salvage something from the wreckage. He'd make promises, apologies, maybe even declarations of love. But the time for all that had passed at exactly 4:30 p.m. yesterday, when I'd stood in their driveway and chosen war over peace. Now there was just the paperwork of ending, and whatever truth about my father Mark thought could save him. Mark looked like he'd aged 5 years overnight. His designer shirt was wrinkled, his face unshaven, his eyes bloodshot from what I assumed was bourbon and tears in equal measure. He sat across from me in Jordan's conference room, his lawyer beside him a public defender. I noticed with cold satisfaction. "Rachel," his voice cracked on my name. I said nothing, just waited. "I know what you think of me. I know I failed you yesterday, but what you've done. You've destroyed my entire family." "No, Mark, your family destroyed themselves. I just stopped enabling it." He leaned forward, desperate. "My father is in the cardiac unit. My mother is on sedatives. James is in federal custody. You've won. Okay, you've won completely." "This isn't about winning." "Then what revenge?" "Justice." Mark laughed bitterly. "Justice. You had $53 million while pretending to be middle class. You lied to me every single day of our marriage. And you let your father assault me while telling me to stay quiet. Which betrayal do you think cuts deeper?" His lawyer cleared his throat. "We're here about the information regarding Robert Gray." Jordan shifted beside me. "Then share it." Mark pulled out a folder, his hands shaking. 3 months before your father died, he met with mine. They had a deal my father would get a massive loan to save his company, and in return... He paused, seeming to gather courage. "In return, my father would ensure you and I got married." The room went silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. "That's ridiculous," I said, but my voice sounded distant. "Your father was dying. Rachel. He knew you'd be alone. He wanted to ensure you had a family. Protection. So he made a deal with mine, save the company, in exchange for bringing you into the Whitmore family." Mark pushed a document across the table. My father's signature at the bottom. Edgar's beside it. A contract essentially selling me into marriage for a business loan. "My father told me to pursue you." Mark continued. "Said you were wealthy, that marrying you would save us. I didn't know about this contract. I swear, I thought I was just following his advice about dating someone with money. But I did fall in love with you, Rachel. That was real. I stared at the paper, my mind racing back through memories. My father introducing me to Mark at that charity gala, the sudden interest Mark had shown, the speed of our courtship. So I was a business transaction. We both were, Mark said quietly. Your father buying you a husband, mine selling his son for a loan. Jordan examined the document. This isn't legally binding. It's essentially a memorandum of understanding between two fathers hoping to arrange a marriage. But it's real, Mark insisted. Don't you see? Rachel. We were both manipulated. Both of us were just pawns in our father's games. I thought about my father, dying of cancer, apparently so worried about leaving me alone that he'd tried to buy me a family. The irony was excruciating. He'd paid for me to be abused, dismissed, humiliated. The difference, I said slowly, is that my father, misguided as he was, acted out of love. Yours acted out of greed. And you chose to stay silent while your family tortured me for years. I'm sorry. No, you're sorry you got caught in the collapse. You're sorry your family is broke. You're not sorry for what you did to me. Mark's lawyer spoke up. Our client is prepared to sign the divorce papers immediately in exchange for a modest settlement. Just enough to start over. No, I said. Rachel, please. I have nothing, less than nothing. My father's debts are in my name too. I'll be declaring bankruptcy by Monday. I stood up. Good. Maybe starting from nothing will teach you what it feels like to actually earn something. That's cold, Rachel. That's not who you were. You're right. The woman who brought wine to your mother's table hoping to be accepted, she's gone. Your father shoved her down, and you told her to stay quiet, and she listened. But she got up as someone else, someone who doesn't need your family's approval or your conditional love. I signed the divorce papers Jordan had prepared, then pushed them across the table. Sign them. Be grateful I'm not coming after you for alimony. Mark signed with shaking hands. What happens now? To my family. Edgar will probably serve 18 months for tax evasion. James is looking at 3 to 5 years for insider trading. Victoria's been disbarred. Clara? I paused. Clara will have to get a job. Maybe at Nordstrom, since she knows their inventory so well. And me? You'll survive. People like you always do. You'll find another woman to disappoint, another family to enable your weakness. I turned to leave, then stopped. Mark that contract between our fathers. Frame it. Put it on your wall wherever you end up. Let it remind you that everything love, family, loyalty, everything has a price. Your family taught me that. It's the only valuable lesson they ever gave me. I walked out of the conference room, out of the building, into the bright November afternoon. Black Friday traffic was getting worse, people carrying on with their normal lives, unaware that my entire world had shifted, broken, and reformed in the space of 24 hours. My phone had one new message, from Clara, of all people. You've destroyed us. I hope you're satisfied. I deleted it and called Jordan. Donate everything, I said. Every penny from the Whitmore liquidation, women's shelters, food banks, legal aid for domestic violence victims. Make it public. I want everyone to know that the Whitmore fortune is doing more good in death than it ever did in life. All of it. All of it. I still have my father's money. That's more than enough. Rachel, are you sure? I thought about my father, trying to buy me happiness from his deathbed. About Edgar, shoving me down at his own table. About Mark, forever choosing the path of least resistance. About myself, sitting silent for too long, believing that endurance was the same as strength. I'm sure. And Jordan, make sure the donation is in my father's name. Robert Gray. Let him be remembered for something better than that contract. I drove home to my simple apartment, past the mall where families were shopping, past restaurants where people were eating leftover turkey sandwiches, past lives that hadn't imploded over gravy and grievances. Tomorrow, the news would run stories about the charitable donation. The Whitmores would wake up in their newly diminished circumstances. Mark would start looking for a job, and I would begin the process of deciding who Rachel Gray, not Whitmore, never again Whitmore wanted to be. But tonight, I made myself a simple dinner, opened a book I'd been meaning to read, and didn't check my phone once. Outside, Raleigh settled into its Friday night routines, unaware that sometimes the quietest person at the table holds all the cards. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But I'd learned something better. Sometimes the best revenge is simply walking away, leaving them to live with the consequences of who they chose to be, while you choose to become someone entirely new. The Whitmores had taught me about power, about cruelty, about the price of silence. But in the end, I'd taught them something too. Never mistake quietness for weakness. And never ever tell a woman with $53 million to stay silent. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in my situation? I'm curious to hear your perspectives.